welcome to the Bookkeepers podcast. I'm Zoe Whitman. I'm here with Joe Wood, and we're joined by Stephen Locke today. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Hello. Hi, Zoe. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
How is your day going?
It's good. It's really, really good. Other than, as I was saying before, the noisy people digging the road up outside, but everything else is really good in my world. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, we don't think we can hear the sound, so I'm sure everything will be absolutely fine for anyone listening in. Well, Stephen, I wonder, we know each other. I feel like I've known you for years, but I haven't really. We know each other from a mastermind that we're a part of and another community we're a part of. And I know you as a really fabulous leadership and mindset coach. But I wonder if you want to start by telling us a bit about your background and how you would describe what you do.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess my profession, I'm a professional executive and leadership coach. I run my own coaching business. I'm based in Home Firth, which for those people watching who are of a certain age, that is where Last of the Summer Wine was filmed. So, yeah. There is still, the cafe is round the corner. It still looks the same way that it did on the TV. So that's where I'm based in Yorkshire. But I started my career in the software industry. I worked for Hewlett-Packard in France. I worked in a startup in London. And then I quit my job and went to South America for a year. And then for the last portion of my career, I worked in the health service, rising to be the Chief Information and Technology Officer at the National Institute for Health Research, where I was doing that job during COVID. So I helped to run the UK government's research response to the COVID pandemic. And then alongside all of that, I was always interested in innovation, leadership, coaching, things like that, and personal development. And so eventually I decided to go out on my own, and here I am.
Wow. So did you have that, that entrepreneurial, like, oh my goodness, I need to stop working for somebody else and I need to go out there and do this for myself? And was COVID partly a reason for that?
COVID was a little bit, but only in a way that's kind of boring for the people that are watching. I should have said at the beginning, it was making me smile a little bit to log on to the Bookkeepers podcast, because I can barely count. And I've got one, I'm good at lots of things, but money isn't one of them. So it was making me smile. But really, it was working with a coach myself that did it, Joe. I was like, I was always just intending to climb the ladder. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, what do you want to do? I'd have said, I want to be a CEO. And I meant of a big organization. And then I worked with a coach, and one day, the coaching process is magic. And I found these words coming out of myself, which was, I want agency over my time. And it was like, so there you go. You don't get that working in a big organization. No,
you don't. And also, we don't often have that time, because it feels quite self-indulgent. When we talk about having a coach, people, I don't tell lots of my friends that I think, we work usually with multiple coaches in different ways. And also we're very lucky to have lots of friends that are coaches. So even having a normal chat ends up being a bit of a coaching session. And my friends, it's hilarious. My friends actually say to me when we're talking about anything and I say something that's empowering, they go, oh my God, you really should be a coach. And I'm like, oh my God, you have no idea what I do you? But they don't. And they think I'm a bookkeeper and they don't know that. And that's absolutely fine. So we are very lucky to have those people around. But you have to be in a point in your life that you're willing to listen as well. And so sometimes you might have heard the words that coach had said to you at another time from someone else, but you weren't ready to hear it. And so I think timing is really important around any kind of coaching. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I'm sure everybody that follows what you do, they wouldn't be doing it if they weren't on a personal improvement journey, would they? They wouldn't be. So, whole point of why they look to you and Zoe is for help to become something that they're not yet. And that's what the coaching process is all about, isn't it? It's usually around solving problems or achieving goals. Those are the two main things. I like to go a little bit deeper. That's something that I love. But yeah, you've got to be ready, 100%.
So we wanted to talk to you about seeing yourself as a leader, because I think when many of us become bookkeepers and accountants, or when we start our own businesses, or I called myself a freelancer. That's what that was the phrase I used that I could understand coming from years and years of employment. I thought, right, I'm a freelancer, so I could be sort of hired by lots of people, and I never thought about having a team. I even say to Jo now, actually, I've said several times in the last year, and she's like, you've got to stop saying this. I'm such a bad manager. But I don't even see myself as starting a business that needed to manage anyone apart from myself. And yet what we really know is that we do the best work when we almost like step out of our business and look at it with that top view, the leadership view, like the CEO of our business. But that is a massive mindset shift to get there. And I don't really have a question. I feel like there's a really big conversation there around how do you do that? And maybe the first bit is actually the realization. Like when you're working with your clients, do you see that? Do they know they need to be a leader, or is that a given for them?
Okay. I know there's not a question, but I want to unpick what you just said a little bit there, because there's some like misconceptions. I'm not saying that you have them, but maybe. So one is like, what is leadership? Is a question. You have to ask that first. And there's all sorts of definitions that you could look up to. But if you said to the average person in the street, what is a leader? Could you point at one? Now, I'm sorry to say there will be a fair proportion of the population that would visualize a white middle-aged man in a suit, right? Or they might think of somebody charging towards something, maybe in battle or something like that. And that's a form of leadership, both of those two things. You can be a leader and do those things. However, I was very fortunate a few years ago. I got to study leadership for a whole year, but not full time. But I got to go to Ashridge Business School to be taught leadership. And one of the things that stuck with me the most is the concept that leadership is actually a social act. Leadership happens between people. And once you understand that, you can be a leader in any circumstance, regardless of where you are in a hierarchy, whether you have lots of people to employ or not. You can embody the role of a leader and just be it. You don't need anybody's permission. I'm going to pause because I could just go for like an hour. But
no, I was just thinking there about different scenarios in like everyday life where people naturally lead. So as a mother, sometimes I lead the family into decisions, and we're all going to sit around the table and we're all going to put our phones down and have a nice meal. Like it doesn't, and I'm thinking of my friend who is Romanian, and so her language isn't like she speaks fluent multiple languages, but she worries that she says people think I'm loud and I don't understand what they're saying, and she doesn't think she's a leader. But I tell her, if there's a zombie apocalypse, that woman, she'll be cutting off chickens' heads and making fires, and I would see her in a leader role. Like she is fearless in multiple, but she would not see herself like that because she's thinking of that white man in a suit thing. But I would trust her with my life, and I think, and so that's really interesting, thinking about it in more of a social thing, because we do automatically think of corporate maybe rather than just every day.
Absolutely. That's so powerful, Jo. And your friend sounds amazing, by the way. There's also, there's like an and to that. So there are people like that who just have this capacity to step into challenge, in a very clear way. And it sounds like, the fact that you said zombie apocalypse makes you think, right, okay, this is, I'm seeing all sorts of things about this person's characteristics, personality, the way they speak, the way they make people feel, and so on. And she sounds incredible. I'd love to meet her. There's also, you can be an extremely good leader and be an introvert and be quiet. And I think, you don't have to be that, because if you come back to this idea that it's a social act, if you maybe think, sorry, I don't know enough about your backgrounds, but if you've ever been in a corporate or in a bigger team, sometimes, right, have you ever been in this situation where you've got a team and then there's an obvious manager, but the manager's a bit of a whatever, either not very good or absent or a bit of a pain. But there's somebody who remembers everybody's birthday, who makes sure that they check in when they notice that Sarah's not feeling great, that that is leadership, right? But it's it's undervalued. It's often embodied, not always, not exclusively, but often female, characteristics that I'm describing there in teams. But that is the glue that holds teams together. So that is social leadership.
That's really interesting, because I like my first manager, my first proper job, because I had a lot of jobs before, but the first job where I was a trainee accountant was in local government. And actually I had a brilliant manager, and definitely I would say he's still in that space anyway, and definitely someone who's seen as a leader and respected. But he was very much in his office doing the things he did. And although he was my manager, really there were some other people who mentored me, is how I would look at it. Mm-hmm. But and I don't suppose I would have seen them as a leader, like what you just said about the social glue, because like you say, those kind of things, the being tuned into people, the person who organizes the Christmas party or sorts the birthday presents out, it's often seen as, that person's just procrastinating and not doing any work. So isn't that interesting that actually is somebody who values the people dynamics and knows that that's an essential part of the way a team operates?
Yeah. And also that means if you start to see leadership in that way, if we bring it back to, I know a lot of bookkeepers work, alone, or they work in small, they're working in small groups. I'm sorry, am I making an assumption that's correct there? I think I am.
No, you are. That's right. Yeah, but a lot of people, we naturally tend to be more introverted, and tend to like to have our head in the numbers. And then me and Zoe come along and say you need to build a personal brand, and they don't like it. But yes,
we did. It was last year. We had a meetup with a number of bookkeepers and accountants in Wrexham. Do you remember, Joe? And we did something a bit like Myers-Briggs. So sort of, Stephen, like personality test. You put yourself in a little box of where you are, and they actually the place. I feel like we did the actual Myers-Briggs thing, but also they had their own version of it in the organisation that hosted us, Moneypenny.
Who's who in the zoo?
Yeah, so
I've done that one. Yeah. I've done that.
So which animal are you? And it was very interesting to understand who was where and why our relationships with a certain type of person, like I find certain personality type quite intimidating and difficult. And and other people would be like, that's just that person. That person's quite direct, but because of where I am in the zoo, that's, I feel differently. And I'm peacocking now because I need to tell you a story about the whole thing. But when you look at like Myers-Briggs or that kind of example, what you would find in the room is that the majority of bookkeepers and accountants are very focused on the numbers, like the process. And then Joe and I are like over there somewhere. And like it was not the profession we were supposed to choose or something. No, not that really, but we see it from a different side. And that might explain why we do what we do and why we care so much about what we do. So
it was interesting what Stephen said earlier. So I definitely associate myself with wanting to be in the numbers and doing that stuff. But what Stephen said earlier, there are some people, it's like I want to do it for other people so that they see it's possible. So so I don't necessarily want to do it, but I know that if I don't, then no one else will, and then no one will know it's possible. There's that drive in me. So even when I sold my practice, there was a massive part of me. It was like, do you want to do this? I'm not sure, but if I do this, imagine the other people that know that this is possible for bookkeepers to build and sell a practice. And now even this week, I've had 2 people telling me that they're selling parts or all of their practice. And I'm like, that's more important to me, more than my pain, even though I am. So I think you can be a bit of everything. You can be a mixture. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I have a bit of I don't love things like Myers-Briggs. And, you know, in the coaching world, that kind of tool is used a lot. I tend to say to people with that, by all means, do those kinds of things, but don't just let it be information. Don't let it put you in a box, because Joe, as you've said, well, you don't fit neatly in here and neatly in there. And sometimes when we do the questionnaire, so when you were in Wrexham, for example, it's influenced also by who else is in the room on that day. And so, yeah, by all means do it and go, what is this telling me? You know, what is interesting about this? What is useful? And then forget about it. Don't let it put you in a box. But also, Zoe, like to your point, like I've spent a lot of my career working with software engineers and analysts and people like that, and they're geeks, right? I even, like, one of my old colleagues used to say that our departmental motto was "We geek so you don't have to," right? So software engineers are very similar, I think, in terms of bookkeepers. You know, they're comfortable. There's a reason why they're drawn to that profession. They get their head down, they solve problems, they work through things methodically, they can concentrate, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's me, like, clearly not like that, but I speak geek. So I love working with people like that myself. But here's the thing that I think is really interesting as well, is if the more you learn about yourself, however you do that, you know, get a coach, get a mentor. I'm sure, you know, following the things that you do, listen to podcasts, read books, whatever, meditate, whatever you find out about yourself, whatever it is, that can be leveraged to help you have more influence on the world.
Yeah, that's it. And the world needs a bit more of everyone, whatever it is that you bring. Yeah.
So there's I would just like to burst this myth that it's about individuals. What it's called is heroic leadership, right? So this idea that usually, you know, a great person, usually a man, can solve all of our problems. And you see this with elections in the world and things like that, where particularly if you've got like presidential elections, and I know we won't get into politics, but let's say, and I don't mean this in any way as a comment on who's right or who's wrong, but if you think about the way they're expressed, it's like this fearless leader that's in this tribe or that tribe is going to solve all our problems. But that's not how society actually works. It's not how huge democracies actually work. Now, those people have huge influence, obviously, but they also get really frustrated by the fact that they can't command everybody just to do what they're told. And if you understand that, and maybe politics to, you know, a bookkeeper is a bit of a leap. But if you think, well, hold on a minute, what do I have in my character? Well, everybody's got experience of something. One of the things that I've leveraged in myself is that for a period of time, I was a single parent. That's an unusual in our society for a man to be a single parent of a couple of primary school age kids. And I didn't choose that. I didn't want it, but I got through it. And that taught me something about myself. And part of that is that I'm resilient. Okay. So I might not be the most exciting person in the world. I might not be the coolest person in the world. I might not be blah, blah, blah. But I am really good at grinding out a result over a long period of time, right? And you take that personality trait and apply it to business and go, well, hold on a minute. I'm not, you know, there's other coaches out there that if you saw what they talk about online, it would be more exciting, more catchy, whatever. But I show up every day and I don't give up, and I show up again and I don't give up. And that's understanding about myself is useful, so I can lead myself in what I do.
Oh, that's interesting. So, and there is something about that, like leadership in yourself. So having this, you know, talking about politics, we spoke about it just before, like there is something about people that know what they can control
Mhm.
and know what they have, and just being okay with that, and having a sense of self, a sense of accountability for themselves, and knowing that they're not perfect actually is an attractive, and that's something about leadership, isn't it? We are attracted to leaders, and it doesn't mean, and it can be multiple. I was thinking about these scenarios as well. Like my 14-year-old daughter, as soon as we step onto the horses yard, she leads me. The roles completely change because I've not got a clue. And actually, I look to her for guidance. And so it can also be in different situations. It's okay for you not to lead. And that's where I think true leadership comes from, is like stepping back and saying, "No, actually, I don't know this." I just hosted a session with some of our startup members, and someone come on and said, "Oh, this is a really stupid question I'm going to ask." And I'm like, "It's not going to be a stupid question." And actually, I didn't know the answer. And she was relieved and loved the fact I didn't know the answer, because it made herself feel so much better. But the fact, I was like, "Do you know what? I don't know. Let's all look it up together." Actually, not knowing everything. I think we misunderstand that. People think that leadership comes from being perfect or being knowing it all. And that's not it, is it?
Absolutely not. No. So there's a concept. I do some team coaching, and I help sometimes organizations to get teams to work better together. And something that I'm really passionate about is the concept of a self-managing team. Okay. Which, if you think of a company like Spotify, which everybody will have heard of, obviously that's predominantly a software company, but they have a very, very flat structure. So you might say it's an enormous company, but it doesn't have loads of layers. And that's because what they do is they organize the whole company into small teams of around about 8 people. The 8's like a magic number when it comes to this thing, by the way. Around about 8 people. And those people have a specific problem to solve. And they are trusted and trained to solve those problems. And then you assemble lots of teams like that, and you have good ways of communicating from between the teams. And wow, you create something like Spotify, or Google would be similar, Microsoft similar in lots of departments. Now, but the problem is you don't create an organization that has no leaders. What you're trying to do is create a leader-full organization where everybody feels they can step into the space, that it's safe, and that they can express the best of themselves, right? Which translates to any size of organization. But the skill then there is a role within that for a different type of leadership. And it's often called a coaching style of leadership. And that's not just me, it's like drawing it back to coaching. But the point is, you do need people who are able to hold the space for others. So that doing what you did there, Joe, you created that. I use that phrase, hold the space, all the time. So that conversation you're having, clearly that person trusted you enough that they could be vulnerable, ask the question, before you then could also be vulnerable and go, well, actually, I don't know. But that didn't happen by accident. It happened because you co-created that relationship, and you, as probably the senior partner in the conversation, created an atmosphere where everybody can communicate. That makes sense. So it's definitely not about a heroic leader who has the big salary and the Jaguar and all of that.
That's really interesting, because I think that comes down to values and creating an environment where people know this is what to expect from us, and that's like the consistency you just said about like you keep showing up in the same way, and people come to trust that you are reliable in terms of like what you say is true. And that was one of the things I was thinking when I think of a leader. I suppose it's about what I suppose I think when I think of a stereotypical leader isn't necessarily that they have like a fancy car or that kind of thing. It's not like I don't know, chief exec. We've been watching Industry. I don't know if anyone watches that on the BBC, and it's like everyone's like got loads of cash and Rolexes and stuff. It's not that. It's like just the person who has that sort of authority and gravitas, and they've created that trust But I think that when Joe and I say to bookkeepers, you need to show up as a leader, it's not clear that that is actually about showing up consistently. You've got me thinking about how you define a leader and how you define what leadership is, definitely.
Would you like me to suggest some advice for the kind of people that you're talking about? So
Yes,
coaches never give advice, by the way, like not until like session 6. But here's what I would do. So the first thing is, I hinted at it before, is you need to be really clear on who you are. And that is, it's super important. There's exercises that you can do. I'm sure a lot of people will have heard of Simon Sinek and the whole idea of find your why and that kind of stuff. It's really, really important to do that. But sometimes when you step into that world and you start to look at it, you can quickly be overcome by the idea that your why has to be, oh, I'm going to create such and such to save thousands of people around the world from some disease. It doesn't have to be that. Your why might be, if it's honestly held, to be a good person in the world, to do right by your family, to be the best possible bookkeeper you can be. And that is absolutely fine. The point is it true? And actually that is quite hard to figure out, I have to be honest, which is why, hiring somebody like me. No, but ways that I would approach that, coaching is one approach, but like honestly, meditation, yoga, like explore yourself. And you mentioned values, Joe, like write them down. What do you actually care about? And an exercise I like to give people, because you could write down a load of nice words, like I want to be kind, I want to be successful, I want to be blah, blah, blah. You can write the words down. And sometimes, that's a bit of a stereotype as well, isn't it? A business that's got all these words on the wall that nobody actually cares about. A different way of doing it is to say to yourself, when was I most happy in work? Right? And that could be anything that you were doing. And then ask a second question, what were the conditions that made me happy? Right? And then you do the same thing with your personal life. When was I most happy with my personal life? And what were the conditions that led up to that? So I'll just run that experiment on myself. If I say, when was I most happy at work? I've had lots of different jobs and, high and low. One of the honest things that come to mind is when I was 17 years old and I was a milkman in North Yorkshire. That is one of the happiest memories I've got of being at work. So then you go, okay, I'm not going to go back to being a milkman, but what about that tells me something about myself? Well, actually, it was quite independent. I had the van, I could drive the van, I could go where I wanted. I was finished work by 10 o'clock in the morning, so I could go, I had to get up really early, but I was finished early. I could go and play golf. I could, so it was about independence, freedom, working in a small team, satisfying customers. All of that kind of stuff is wrapped up in that. And then in personal life, you might go to, I don't know where I would go with that. I was really happy when me and my wife, Amy, met and we were like bringing our families together and stuff like that. What was going on? Well, there was teamwork in our personal lives. We were both overcoming challenges. We were both single parents. You could write some stuff down and then go, okay, what of that can I bring into today and tomorrow and the next year? And then when you've done that, you say, what is that career, or what is that job, or what is that business, or what is that project? And then you'll be excited. And then the bit that I said about showing up every day becomes a lot easier. That was a lot, wasn't it? Sorry.
No, I love that. That is really. I'm sitting here and my brain is going over and thinking about those times. And I love that you said that it was, something that you wouldn't. Like you say, I don't want to go back to being a milkman, but what were the elements that were, it was attributing to values. Something you said, I can't remember exactly where you said it, but when you said about like you're recognizing and noticing when things were good. And what I've invited myself to do recently, when I speak to people, when something bad is happening. So something bad in business or something bad personally, and you get that horrible feeling in your stomach and you're like, oh, I don't like this. It's like being a bit more curious and inviting yourself to think, what of my values have I not been in alignment with? Like, because usually it's about you. And that's what I've noticed. I'm like, what's not sitting right? What did I not do? And like, especially with work, if a client was unhappy, it would hit me like I'd feel like sick. I'd be like so disappointed. And it's because my thing was I wanted to be an amazing bookkeeper. I wanted to give people an amazing experience, and they weren't experiencing that. So then that like just hit me to the core. So I love the idea of looking out for like and remembering these good things, so you can kind of do that, but start recognizing if something's off, what is a value that's you've not lived in alignment of.
Amazing. I love that, Joe. You're like a guru. And I mean, like that, but that is, Zoe, this is going to freak you out. So you might want to just like take a moment. Joe, I don't think it's going to freak you out. Sometimes when I feel like Joe, right? Do you know what I do? I go and sit in a chair and I don't do anything, nothing occupying my mind, no books, no podcast, no phone, I sit in a chair until I've figured it out. Ooh. And I just go and wait. I call it having the long sit. And I just go and sit there and I go, what is this? And sometimes it takes a few minutes. One time it took me 2.5 hours. I think my wife.
Zoe's not sitting still for 2.5 hours. That's never happening. It would make me feel that's not easy to do. That is not easy to do.
But then to your point, what happens is then you go, eventually you start to think, well, okay, I feel this discomfort, but if you sit with it long enough and you don't look away from it, you don't try to deny it, a couple of things happen. The first one is it becomes less because you're shining the light on it internally, if you see what I mean. And so it lessens the feeling. And then you could say, well, what is behind this? Which is what your point, I'm just repeating what you said, Joe. What's behind it? And in my case, like when I feel like that, it's often might seem unlikely because I guess I'm talking quite fluently at the moment, but I do struggle to speak up for myself in certain situations, you know? And so often that sensation that you're talking about, I would actually experience it here and in my chest, and it would go tight, but it might not be obvious what I'm not saying, you know? So if I sit for long enough, I go, okay, I really want to say this, or I really feel like I didn't express myself right, or I need to apologize, or whatever it might be. But unless you sit with yourself, you won't know.
Oh my gosh, it's so important. Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not going to sit still, am I?
Yeah, I think yesterday, how we usually do is go, oh God, I need a glass of wine, or like you want to distract yourself and get yourself away from that feeling. So you tend to do, or get on a treadmill, Zoe. We tend to do something to busy ourselves so we don't, because it's uncomfortable. But that like true leaders sit with their crap and deal with it. Yeah. And that's why we think like, wow, if you can like lead yourself that way, then you can lead others. But if you're, and it's interesting what you said about those guys in the suits and stuff. I mean, do that like just because they've got lots of money and like they assume to have power. Power isn't leadership, is it?
Oh God, no. This is a whole like kind of worms here, but there's this idea of like situational power. So somebody who's given a job title is given power. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the influence that should come with that power. And maybe this is a great thing that we can package up fairly quickly, is if you think about what is the point of being a leader, it's to have influence. And that could be influence, you've mentioned, Joe, about family. It could be about people in a small business. It can be clients. You want to have influence. And, you know, the person who remembers everybody's birthday and checks in, they're having influence on the mood and the relationships between a large number of people. That's so powerful. So I think I had the benefit of, I had a job for a really long time where I was responsible for all of the stroke, cardiovascular, renal, and diabetes research that happened in Yorkshire. It's like 25 hospitals, few million people, blah, blah, blah. And I couldn't tell a single person what to do. I had targets and I had responsibilities, but I could only get things done through influence. I had to travel around and convince people to care about the projects that I had responsibility for, even though their actual manager had different ideas. So how do you do that? Well, you get people to like you. And how do you do that? You like them. And then you build relationships, and eventually you want to do things together, and that's how it works.
Wow. And what is brilliant about that is it comes all the way round to the ongoing conversation Joe and I seem to be having all the time at the moment about how AI and technology is changing bookkeeping, but the thing that can't be changed and taken away from us is the personal part, what, you know, the people skills that are going to help you to help your clients, the bits that are going to help you build your team and build your business. We've got to get even better at this. So it starts with understanding ourselves, and then when we do, we can understand why we relate to people or different types of people in different ways and how we build those relationships out.
Yeah. Can I go full hippie as we get
like
37
always.
minutes in? When you think about AI and stuff like that, AI can make decisions faster than we can. It will be able to fake human relationships pretty quickly. It's already doing not a bad job of it. There's all sorts of stuff that it will be able to take over. But I think the one thing that it cannot get hold of is love. And I don't necessarily mean romantic love. I mean that if you think about, you remember that thing I said about how were you happiest at work and how were you happiest? If you just for a moment, when you do that exercise, and by the way, if anybody's thinking about doing this, write it down with a pen and a piece of paper. I prefer a pencil, but write down your thoughts. It will help you process them. I guarantee that as you do that, one of the things where you'll be feeling energy is in your heart. Because what you will have experienced is one of the biggest moments of connection or periods of connection in your life with other people. And there is a whole concept around heart-centered leadership, which we don't have time to get into, but if you can tune into your values, tune into who you are, tune into your strengths, and just allow that to be, and trust that if you express that in the world, people will show an interest, they will follow, they will care, and you lead from your heart, then it opens up all sorts of possibilities and relationships, and it's an attractive characteristic. So there we go. Gone full hippie, Zoe. Took me a while, but
I knew it was going to happen. We've loved chatting to you, Stephen. Thank you so much for this today. I wonder if you can tell us how people can connect with you and find out more about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I tend to hang out on LinkedIn quite a lot. So my name's Stephen with a PH, Stephen Locke Coaching. There's a website as well, which is poorly old-fashioned branding and things like that. But yeah, find me on LinkedIn or find me on my website. I genuinely love connecting with people. So if anybody wants to reach out in any way, shape or form, just to say hi, I'd be really happy with that.
Oh, lovely. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And thanks everyone who's tuned in. And we'll see you next week for another episode of the Bookkeepers podcast. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.